and welcome to Building a Powerful and Reliable Major Donor Program. My name is Jean Bell, and I direct the Advancing Practice Program here at the Nonprofit Quarterly. We're thrilled that you're with us. We're equally thrilled that Kim Klein is with us, renowned fundraising expert, and we look forward to your comments today. Before we begin, a few logistics, especially for those who haven't been on one of these programs with us before. On your control panel, you'll see a couple of important things. There's a Q&A box, so at any time a question arises for Kim, go ahead and enter that there. I'll be moderating that, posing questions to Kim in natural breaks and at the end of the session. A caution, stay in tune, because we're going to have 3 polls coming up interspersed, and we're going to ask you to engage in some of the content. So keep totally focused on the content. Don't do your email. There's a lot to learn in this session. If you're using social media, the hashtag for this session is Building Donors. You see it on the screen there. We welcome your comments and reflections on what Kim shares today about building a major donor program. As always, when the session ends, there'll be just a minute and a pop-up will show you an evaluation of the session. It's really important that you complete that. It takes only 2 or 3 minutes. It gives Kim feedback, and it gives us feedback to continue refining this program and providing content that's relevant to you. So please do just take a minute to fill that out. And finally, a special hello to our Nonprofit Quarterly Leading Edge members. This session, like all of the sessions, will go into your on-demand library. You'll be able to watch it again. Perhaps it's something you'll want to share with your development staff or with your board development committee. And if you're not aware of the Leading Edge membership, go to our homepage when you have a second and click on the upper right-hand corner. You'll see a link that says Leading Edge membership, and you can find out more about how to be part of this Advancing Practice program. So let me welcome Kim Klein. She needs little introduction. She is the founder and principal of Klein and Roth Consulting, author of 5 books. As you see here, has trained and consulted in all 50 states and 22 countries. That's really amazing. For somebody only 35 years old, it's particularly amazing. And her sort of seminal text, Fundraising for Social Change, is now in its 7th edition. Kim, that made me want to look up when the first edition was written, and if my research is right, it was 1985. Is that right?
That's correct, yep.
So it's really a generation or a generation and a half of people that have grown up with your content, with your inspiration, and with your particular take on the links between fundraising and social change, which is especially exciting to us here at the Nonprofit Quarterly. So let me turn it over to you. As I said, I'm going to be interjecting with some questions and with some polls along the way, but take it away and let's talk about major donors.
Great, thanks so much, Jean. I'm really happy to be here and happy to be with all of you, and really do encourage your questions, comments, stories, disagreements, whatever, all the way through. And then of course at the end we'll have a special open time for that. So let's just begin with the next slide. One of the things that I noticed about major gifts programs is people tend to overemphasize one aspect of it, and that is the psychological difficulty many people have around asking for money. And that is a very real thing and needs emphasis. But I have noticed over many years of having really focused on that there's another emphasis that I neglected, and that's what I want to focus on today. And that's the whole infrastructure you have to have in place in order to support those brave souls who are willing to go out and ask for money in person. And so you'll see that that's really the emphasis today, much less on the psychology. That's not to say the psychology is not important, but I have found many people who are perfectly happy to ask for money, and the reason they don't is because they don't trust that the organization will get a thank you note out in time, or they don't trust that the person's name will be entered properly, or that they'll be put on the mailing list, or just any number of other things like that. So there's a whole system that we need to have in place, and that's what I want to focus on today. So the first thing is just a reminder, everyone, 99% of you know this already, so you can snooze through this slide. The purpose of fundraising is building relationships, but I feel like you can't say that often enough. And I remember when I first learned this in the 70s, I was like, that's such a great insight, oh my God. And I went back to my office and I was like, okay, let's build some relationship. Like, not a clue. What does that even mean? So I've tried to kind of outline it a little bit here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but just to say, I think you cannot come back to this principle often enough. I know someone who has this slide actually blown up and it sits on her desk to just kind of be a touchstone. And the idea is that people, the first time a person gives, it does not represent the real amount they can afford. It almost never would. So you're just kind of, that's a starting point. That's a very fragile moment in the donor's life. They gave out of an emotion or as a favor to a friend, or they got caught up in some excitement of something. Are they ever going to give again? No, 75% of them will never give again. So, you know, that's, so you kind of focus who are the 25%, the 1 out of 4 that will make a second gift. And then that second gift becomes a little less fragile relationship. It's really motivated by being appreciated, by learning more about the group and so on, and then sort of being asked over and over. And then at a certain point, you want to kind of look and think, is this person ready to be asked for a larger gift? Now, when does this happen? There's no set rule. I think one of the most important insights of fundraising is when you've seen one donor, you've seen one donor. But we can actually also extrapolate, you know, if we have 1,000 donors, 300 of them will behave in one way and another 200 in another way. So we kind of think, okay, how can we meet that need? Generally, we ask for bigger gifts starting in the second year, third year of the relationship. You can start a lot sooner. You can start in the second week, you know, if you have information about that. But that's what we want to focus on, is saying to the person, is the amount, this is sort of the definition of a major gift from the donor's point of view. Is the amount of money I am giving commensurate with how much I say I care about the causes and the work that your organization is doing? Is this the right amount relative to my caring? And only I can answer that question, is it the right amount? You can try to, your organization tries to influence how much I care about the group and how much I understand. And of course, then the ultimate gift is a legacy gift. This is a two-dimensional slide, so it looks like the legacy gift is at the end. In fact, the legacy gift often comes much earlier, but that's a very important feature as well. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Okay, if we can have the next slide. Other thing that's very important is that giving is really changing. And, you know, Jean was very sweet to say that my book has been in use for a generation and a half. And one of the big advantages of being in fundraising for 40 years is I've seen a lot of changes. And the biggest one is, well, I don't know the biggest one. There's so many big ones, but this is a big one that, first of all, people will now, whereas there used to be kind of a more of an order of giving, like people would start with a $50 or $25, and then they would kind of move on in ever increasing amounts. It was very easy. But now people start at $10,000, and then the next year they'll give $200, and then the next year they'll give, you know, $1,000. And and it's like, what is your situation? Why are you doing that? There's some logic from the donor's point of view, but we don't know it. The other thing is that donors, whereas we used to kind of really aim for people to give every year, at least once a year, that was the sign that they were a current donor. Donating is much more episodic. You'll have people that will give every 2 years, they'll give 5 times in 1 year, not again for 3 years. And so it's a little harder to keep track of donors. We don't have that kind of, and I think as boomers, as those of us who are boomers age out and die, you'll have fewer and fewer kind of just regular annual donors, that historical way that people used to donate. And of course, the other thing that's happening, we're in competition with all the ways that people give. And many donors, particularly millennials, are bypassing nonprofits altogether to go to GoFundMe for individual campaigns for an individual that needs, you know, new teeth, or needs a new car, or their mother needs to be defended in court because they've been deported or whatever. And they don't necessarily look to nonprofits to provide those services. And that's interesting and could be the topic of a whole other webinar. And then, of course, we're always in some competition with particularly natural disasters or other kinds of disasters. A little bit, I think, with political campaigns, although the evidence is very clear over many studies that people who politically give, that does not decrease their charitable giving. I think it does. I think where we see that is it decreases their attention. It decreases the attention span they have for the charities that they give to. So just keeping that in mind really means that you have to have very good records. And I'm going to say more about that in a little bit. So that's just kind of a little background. The other thing that I think is very important is to make sure that people know that you raise money. And this is an amazing thing to me, that oftentimes I find that finding out that an organization actually wants a gift from me is like an obscure religious pilgrimage. I mean, I can't find it on their website. The Donate Now button is very discreet, so discreet I couldn't possibly find it. You know, there's no mention of money. There's all kinds of other things that I can support and sign and so on, but do you need money, or, you know, are you funded entirely by Michael Bloomberg? I mean, so we don't know. So one of the audits I like people to do is to really kind of say, in whatever way I would find out about your organization, from a friend, from visiting your office, from visiting your virtual office, that is your website, or any of your other social media, from anything that might come into my mailbox, virtual or otherwise, is one of the things I would learn that you welcome gifts from people like me. And from people like me means people who give $10, people who give $10,000. It's all the same, and it's an important audit to do. And just a quick example of what a mistake we often make is the way that we put in our annual report, we put our big donors in big letters and our widow donors in widow letters. And then some of our really little donors, we just say, and thanks to all the other people who gave under $250, and we can't even be bothered to list your names because it would take up too much space. So there's a real message that organizations are giving to people that your gift isn't important. This is very critical for major gifts, because many people will start with a small gift whose capacity is much greater. And what they're trying to do, and this has been shown in many studies, they're testing the organization. They know if they send 5,000, they'll get a nice thank you. But what they want to know is, will they be appreciated if they send 25 or 50? So make sure all that's in place. It's the right thing to do. It's a moral thing to do, and it's very practical. So just with that little bit of information, let's just start with our first poll.
Yeah, let's check in with folks. So let's start with a question about your overall approach to building relationships. When you consider that your own fundraising program from a building relationships perspective, as Kim has described, how would you rate yourself? Well, we're glad you're on this webinar, and it's a good time to reset and think about what gets in the way of having a relationship-centered program. Is that right, Kim?
Yeah, I would say, although I'm glad so many people said they were strong. That was a third. So that's really good. So you kind of just think, well, how can you get stronger? And I'm sure some of you are a little bit self-effacing and self-critical. So you're probably somewhere between that strong and not so strong. So that's good. And as we go along, then kind of think, especially those of you who are in the not so strong or the weak category, what is your question about that? It's not your lack of being smart. It's something is keeping you from moving up that line. All right, let's go into the next slide. And this is my psychology slide, my only one, that you are going to need to talk about money. And I noticed a funny thing about fundraising, like, and you see it in the titles that people have, and so many of us on this webinar today are staff. So, you know, the finance person in an organization is called something about finance, director of finance, finance person, you know. The program person is called the program director, but the fundraising person is never called fundraising. It's like, we're just not going to use that word. We use like resource mobilization, or, you know, advancement or development or community engagement, or any number of other things, because God forbid we say anything about money. And, you know, I don't really care what titles. I'm in favor of all kinds of titles, but I think it is sort of amusing. And you will have to be willing to say money. You'll have to be willing to say, you know, Sarah Jones, would you consider going from 1,000 to 2,000? And staff, you have to lead the way, and particularly those of you on the webinar who are executive directors, you have to set an example. The board follows the example of the director, and if they think you're not doing it, you won't do it for pay, they're going to think I am not doing it for free. So you really have to get comfortable with that. And I want to give you some ways to, instead of trying to get comfortable like in some great, you know, Jungian deconstruction and reconstruction of your personality, let's just bypass our anxiety and approach it from a whole other angle, like just go around the block and come in the alley the other way. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to give you some tips about that I also think strengthen the infrastructure of your organization. Keep in mind that giving is always an exchange of values. People often think it's like, oh, I don't like asking for money because it feels like begging. But begging is when you ask for something you have done nothing to deserve. And if your group is in that position, then you have to ask Jean for a webinar for pathetic loser groups, okay? So but I'm gonna kind of go off the idea that your guys are doing super good work, very important, and you're probably doing it at a fraction of the price that anyone else would do it. So what is it that people are paying you to do? People have a choice now in the United States, United States alone, let alone the world, of 1.5 million nonprofits. Why are they going to pick your nonprofit? It's because they think you're doing something that they want to see done. Or as Kay Grace, the superb fundraising person, says, people don't give to you because you have needs. They give to you because you meet needs. And so what needs are you meeting that I think need to be met? And so that's the value principle, the principle of the exchange. Another way to understand it is people are going to give away their money. 65% of Americans, whether they're born here or come here from another country, 65% of adults living in this country give away money. And they're going to give it away. And the only question for you is, are they going to give it to your group or somewhere else? It's not a question of are they going to give or not. That money is going out there. And your job is to get in the way of it, to stand in front of the person and say, as long as you're giving away money, how about my group? Okay. So be very, very clear about that. I think we let our anxiety about asking get way too much in the way of the really excellent work that we do. So that brings us to our next poll.
So this is a personal question about, now you might not have any experience at all, so that's one. But if you do have experience asking for money, where are you on this list? Not at all comfortable, do it but don't love it, some aspects of it, love it, most enjoyable part of my job. Is this about typical, Kim?
Yeah, this is good. I think really where you want to be is right here, where I like some aspects of it and do it regularly, or I can do it but don't love it. People that is the most enjoyable part of their work may want to really consider getting a different job. There really ought to be other things that are just as enjoyable. So that was really good. And those of you with no experience at all, you know what? I'm going to say that you do have experience, because unless you've lived under a rock, you have been asked for money. You know what it's like to be asked. You know how you feel about it. You know how you like to be appreciated. So take that experience as a donor and apply it to asking, and you'll see that you know a lot more. So again, I'm not focused on the psychology of asking today, but it is a critical feature. Okay, it's just not the only critical feature.
You know what, Kim, I just wanted to emphasize your point about thinking about your own donor experience. It's so fun to be a major donor. Whatever, I mean, it really is. It feels like I've found a cause that I deeply care about, and to your point, I'm giving an amount that's meaningful to me. And I always try to stay in touch with that, like how good that feels. As long as there's a match, I think you'd be interested. It feels great to be a major donor, doesn't it?
No, yeah, absolutely.
So you're inviting someone into that part of themselves.
Well, when you really think about it, if you say to people, raise your hand, I do this a lot of times in classrooms, raise your hand if you feel good when you give away money. Every single person raises their hand, So, but raise your hand if you love to ask for money. No, there's all. So don't confuse asking with giving. Asking is asking, giving is giving. And we project way too much onto the donor doesn't like this. The donor doesn't like to be asked. The donor doesn't want to be asked for more. The donor doesn't want to be asked often. The donor doesn't want to be asked at the door. You don't know anything about this person. What you know is your anxiety, okay? And your anxiety is getting in your way. So not everything's about you. Kick that. There's an old saying in fundraising, if you don't like to ask for money, kick yourself out of the way and let the cause talk. Because at the end of the day, it's just not about you as the asker. And it's very much about you as a donor. I think Jean's right about that. So let's look at the steps for creating a great major donor program in the next slide. They're pretty straight up. I think probably most of you know it. You need to have a very clear case for needing more money. I do find every once in a while these really lucky groups that have a lot of money and they're like, well, it's time to ask for more money. I'm like, well, why? Do you need it? No. Okay. So if that's your situation, you might as well drop off the webinar now. Because it's silly to ask people for more money if you don't need it. So you need to have a clear case. What are you going to do with it? What's happening? What's gotten bigger in your organization? Obviously, you need to have a very well-functioning database or CRM and with good information about your donors. I will say more about that in a little bit, but remember two things. One, you're not the CIA. You do not need to know everything about your donor. And two, you need to know more than their name and address. So try to find a space in that spectrum. The really most important thing, I think, for building a major donor program is to have a team of people who help you raise the money. You cannot do this by yourself or with one or two other staff. And even these organizations that have whole departments, they may have a major gifts officer. That's another little title that's very funny, these sort of militarized terms. But they have officers and you know, and other people, and but you really need a team of volunteers. Most of us aren't lucky enough to have just an enormous staff. You have to help them with people, and I'll talk about what a portfolio is in a minute. And you have to ask for money directly, clearly, at least once a year. And if I could make 5 leap off the page, I would right now. All right, so let's just go through these fairly quickly. Next slide. The case is, why do you exist and what do you do about it? And, you know, a little bit more like, what are your goals? What have you done? Why should I trust you? What's your history, your track record, things like that. That's called a case statement. I think your case, you really want to be able to boil it down to something that can be said fairly simply, even I know some of you are kind of like, well, it just oversimplifies. I find this a lot in science groups, especially like, oh, that's way too oversimplified. Well, but it is what people can understand. And if they want to know more, they can find out more. These are 2 very good examples. Just kind of what do we want? $15 an hour. It's like very, very straight up. We don't have endless supporting evidence that is a living wage. If people want that, they can find it. This one, water, they dump it, you drink it. We won't stop till they clean it up. It's pretty straight up. Not like, how did it get there? What exactly is it doing to the soil, and blah, blah, blah. People want that, they can find it out. So I'm hoping all of you have a pretty clear case. The next slide is really fundamental to building your case. You have a goal, and you have a plan to meet your goal. The plan includes this thing, which is called a gift range chart or a gift table, which kind of shows how many gifts of what size you're going to need to meet your goal. And this is really this is where the internet is just a lifesaver. If you go online and you write in gift range chart, you're going to get all kinds of explanations of it, plus these algorithms that create them for you. So we don't even have to do math like we had to for a long time. But the basis of a gift range chart is the idea that whatever your goal is, and here I've used a very simple goal, $50,000. And you could use this could be your goal for a year, some of your really small groups, but this could be a goal for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. Doesn't matter. But the idea is any goal, $50,000, $50 million, you're going to need 2 gifts, at least 2 gifts that are about 10% of the goal. You're going to need another 4 gifts, 4 to 6 gifts that are another 10% of the goal together. And you're going to need another set of gifts, 8 to 10 gifts that are another 10% of the goal. And then after that, you just need more gifts at less money. This is like drawing a map to your house on the back of a napkin. It's not to scale or anything. But the point is that if you can get that top 30% of your goal from about 15 or 16 people, you have a very good chance, a 90% chance you will make your goal, because there's something very magnetic about those big gifts. So that's why we want to focus on those. They are not only valuable by the sheer size that they are, 5,000 in this case, but also because they give other people confidence. So for just a simple-minded example, if you say our goal is 50,000, and you come to me and say, Kim, I'd like you to help, and I say, well, how much have you raised so far? And you say 0, and I was thinking I would give 250. That doesn't feel very good. But if you're able to say, well, we're at 45,000, my 250 feels like it's very much on a trajectory, and you're just really almost at the finish line there. So that's very, very important. And I would really take the time, any of you who are not familiar with gift range charts, to just go online and look up any of the many, many explanations of them, and you'll see the logic of them. The other thing is, of course, you need a team. And what makes a good fundraising team, ideally, I suppose the fundraising team is a committee of the board, but let's face it, in real life, that's almost never true. It might be 1 or 2 good board members, but you can form a team. It doesn't have to be board members. It can be all kinds of people. They can come together to do a campaign. Like I do a lot of campaigns, raising a certain amount of money in 6 weeks. We put a team together, and they work really hard, and then they disband, so they don't feel like they're in for life, and they're willing to do it. It's all kind of ways to work around a team. But what makes any good team? Very clear expectations. You get on this, you're going to be on this team. It's going to take this much time. You're expected to make your own gift. You're expected to bring in at least 6 other gifts. That clear, measurable. The work is meaningful. It will lead to this. It will lead to that. It will allow us to expand. We'll open a satellite office. And your reward for doing your work is you get time off. I can't tell you how often really good people are driven out the door of organizations because when they do something well, the next thing that is asked of them is more work. Well, you did that so well. How about sharing the auction? really? How about ripping my nails out? So no, okay. And then of course, anytime that someone gets on a team and they don't do their work, to really sit down with them. And, we kind of say, get curious, not furious. Just say, what happened? Did you have buyer's remorse? Did you realize you kind of overextended? Was it harder than you thought? Did you not get the support you needed? What's the deal here? Let's have some conversation about it. And, don't, not everybody's going to be on this team. It doesn't make them a bad person. They do something else for your group. But it's very important. The next slide kind of indicates, if we can go to that, you want on your fundraising committee people that are willing to take risks. So you can't have all your most fragile flowers and there. These are people that are willing to say to somebody, look, I don't know your other charitable commitments, but do you think you could double your gift to $50,000? They have got to be willing to say that and realize the answer could be no. The answer could be drop dead. The answer could be yes. The answer could be I can't go that high. And the answer could be I'm going to stay where I am. Or the answer could be get back to me in 3 weeks. Doesn't matter what the answer is. They have to be willing to ask the question and then sit with the person while the person works stuff out. So that's a risk that we have to be willing to take. So pick for your team people who love to be at the front of things. And kind of, I'm the early adapter. I'm bold. And that boldness will actually spread through the whole organization. So the first time you put together a fundraising team is always the hardest. And after that, it actually begins to attract, almost like the gifts. The askers, the boldness of the askers begins to attract other boldness out of other people. All right.
Kim, just a couple questions here. The team, as you said, it could be very time bound. You gave a 6-week example. So you're using the word team and not committee, which, as you said, so many people are familiar with. Who's going to be on the board fundraising committee, which sounds like a sentence, yeah. Like it's as long as your term or as long as we can keep you or what have you. Can you speak a little bit more to the difference between a team and a committee? Are they interchangeable? Are you saying team on purpose or distinctively?
I mean, they're probably interchangeable. I'm not a huge semantic person about this, but I think a team really has the sense, unlike a committee, a team actually moves in some unison. So they have a unified goal. You and like if you and I are on a team, we know that our job is to see these 4 people, and these other members of our team are going to see these other people, and this is going to happen, and we're all going to work together, even to move the goal along. So it's not my personal glory. Also, I could get 10 people to ask, and for whatever reason, 8 of them would say no, and you would get 10, and 8 of them would say yes. Are you a better fundraiser than me? Maybe you are. That could be, but that's not the sign of it. It's just a sign of, oh, we just luck of the draw. It's sort of like in a basketball game. I mean, I remember reading that Michael Jordan had missed 16,000 shots in his career. He missed 300 game-winning shots. The last shot in overtime was his shot, and he missed it and lost. And he said, that's why I'm a success, that I am willing to do that. And so, yeah, and he knew then there would be another game. And also he was not alone on the field. So I like that. A committee has more of the sense that we come together, we yak, and we run out individually and do our thing, and then we come back together. So that's why I use that word team. That's a good question. Any other questions right now?
Well, I mean, someone has asked, part of the reason I asked that is someone has asked, what if you're a one-person shop? And I think what you're saying is, I mean, of course, one person can ask for money, but a major donor program is simply not a one-person endeavor. Or am I overstating that?
That's exactly right. Don't be a one-person shop. You may be the one paid person. I get that. And I have a lot of sympathy with you, and I have been that person a lot of times. Don't be alone. Then go out and get other thought partners, other people that will work with you, other people that will sit with you, other people that will listen to your complain. But like, have a team, make a team. That's your first.
Yeah, and maybe if you're not thinking, it's not clear to you who would be on the team, that might even be a sign that you're not quite ready, right? I mean, in terms of, is there a group of people that you can imagine being on the front line with you, being out there boldly? Like, that's important to build that first, probably, before you go out with confidence, to the market, if you will, of donors.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you honestly cannot find anyone who's willing, even if they don't have to like it. Remember, people say to me, I don't like fundraising. I'm like, I don't care. Who cares? Like, I don't like flossing my teeth, but I do. So it doesn't matter. But if you cannot in your organization find 3 or 4 people that will help with fundraising, then I really question, do people want your organization to exist? I mean, do they really think this is important?
Well, and specifically, it may be that you've been institutionally funded your whole time,
Yeah.
and so they just don't think of you as donative, or you don't have a donative community around you. And at least with my clients, I feel like there's this gap between being an institutionally funded organization, which, as you know, many are at the inception, especially human service and social change groups, and then having to get to this donative place where they're identifying that community around them. You have to do that work to identify that community, including the volunteers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
ED be on the team.
The ED can be on the team, yeah, and ideally would probably at least show up for team meetings every so often. The main thing the ED does is almost like just set an example so the team can look and think, oh, that's how it's done. Okay, I can do that. So I think that depends a little bit on how many other staff you have and what the other jobs of the ED are. The issue about moving from particularly being entirely foundation funded to being individual donor funded, I think is a very, that's an important one. And people call me all the time. They'll say, we lost our foundation funding, or we've had a decreased fund, and now we need to get individuals. And it's not, this is not like, I can't eat strawberries anymore, so I'm going to substitute, citrus. I mean, it's not like that. You have to kind of think, I want individual donors. I want to know that people in my community really believe in what we do, and they are going to express that belief in part with their donations. And that if I cannot find a group of people who really believe that, I'm going to really question, are we getting out there with our case? Are we saying things properly, or are we really needed? It's a philosophical issue rather than just substituting, one thing for another. Those of you who are previously government funded and lost your government funding, that's a different thing, because you probably should be funded by the government. That's probably the right way for your organization to exist. And if we had a fair and just tax policy, that would be the case. So your philosophy around individual donors may have to take into account, do you want the individuals also to advocate for you and to vote in a certain way and so on. So that's a whole thing. We could do a whole webinar on that, actually, the philosophy of this. But assuming people really honestly, out of a genuine authentic desire for individual donors, want them, then you have to have a team that helps you find them. So one more slide on this topic. People often say, well, where do you find all these people? And you know what? One place I look a lot is former board and staff. I notice that particularly board members, they leave the board and that's it. It's as if they never existed.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was talking to an ED the other day. I was the ED for 15 years and I left, and the new ED is fantastic, but now I'm not even on the mailing list. Which is really an insult. So also longtime volunteers who really are very clear about the case for the organization, can really describe it, have a lot of stories. That's a very short move to be able to ask for money for some of them, not for all of them. And of course, I always look to donors, somebody who can say, I hope you will join me in doing this. Very, very important. And the final group is recently retired people, and I'm in that category. A lot of friends of mine who are sort of like, oh, retirement is great, and then after a few months you're like, wow, this is a lot of time. And so that's a really good time to get them back in. And remember, one of the ways that you can actually strengthen a relationship with someone is ask them to do something. Even if they turn you down, they're pleased that you thought of them. No one is ever insulted to be asked to be on a team. So all right, let's do one more poll.
Sure. So this is about the strengths of your program, and you can pick all that apply, just reflecting on, oh, sorry for the typo in strong. Do you have a clear case? Do you have good data in a good database? Do you have a strong fundraising team that we've just discussed? Do you have good support from the staff? And at least some people who are willing to ask for money, because there's no getting around that.
Oh, that's great. You know what? I'm super pleased that so many people said they have a clear case. And those of you who didn't, the 26% of you who didn't, kind of really think, what's not clear about it? I bet it's not that it's just completely not clear. There's something that needs to be tweaked there.
Mm-hmm. But it's not surprising that we're getting so many questions about the team, because that's the piece. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good support from staff. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so this group of attendees are in pretty good shape. Obviously, in some places you could be in better shape. So let's go on into some more into the weeds of the infrastructure. If we go to the next slide. Something I really recommend, highly, highly recommend, is that on your team, that every person has a portfolio, donor portfolio. And basically this means if I'm on your team, I have a group of donors that I'm in charge of, and my job is to be in touch with them all year long in a variety of ways. And then once or twice a year to ask them for money in person. And I find that people are far more willing to ask for money in person if they feel like they have a relationship with a person, that they're not just in a transaction, that the only time the person hears from them is when they want money. So that's the idea of this. And also I learn more about the donors. I learn their, their personal situation, what they really care about. It puts me in a much better position to ask them for larger gifts and eventually to ask them, of course, for legacy gifts. So that's the nature of a portfolio program. Let me show you an actual portfolio page. If we can go to the next slide. I think people are fairly familiar with this. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, this is from a Land Conservancy group that I work with. This is halfway through, a little over halfway through last year. This would be the notes of a particular person. So this is their donor. All the names have been changed, but this is the donor. This is their giving history. Okay. The information I would have, you can see she's in her mid 80s. Her husband's been dead now for 10 years. Where she's active. And then my personal thing is how much I've been in contact with her. So just look through this. All right, so January 12th, she was invited to a film screening. She doesn't like to go out at night. Okay, so this is now a clue for me. Don't invite her to things at night, or if you're going to do that, make sure that she has a ride, okay? Then she was going to come to the picnic, but she got sick, so I came by with the program book. Then she sent $250 for whatever reason, even though she's just been sent $5,000. Then I sent a note about a new person on our team, and then I arranged a visit to discuss the annual campaign, but she can't talk right now, so they're going to meet in August and so on. And so this would go through to the end of the year. And then always in this contact, you have written in what is the next step. What is the next step? And sometimes the next step is very personal to that person, and sometimes it's a more general thing. The next step is I'll be invited to the annual meeting, and that's what everybody's next step would be. So this information is, some of it, of course, is in the database, but a lot of it is my personal record of my portfolio. And then when I turn over my portfolio to someone else, I might summarize some of this, but I'm not going to. This is more just for me to keep track to make sure I'm actually having my touches. So
I see. So sorry. So you're keeping this in Word or Google or Excel on your own. Some of the data is in the organizational CRM, but you're saying this is a portfolio manager's approach to track their work. Okay.
Right. So because I can imagine that some of you on the webinar, development people, or your hair just went on fire when you thought, I'm not supposed to keep track of all this as well. No. But it does mean you have to trust your portfolio people that they are doing these touches, because you're not necessarily having records of them. And from time to time, you may want to go through the portfolio with each of your managers to say what stuff should be in the database. For example, in this particular instance, what should be in the database is this person's age. That's a feature that might actually have an influence on. I'm not sure that you would ask her to do a GoFundMe campaign, a peer-to-peer campaign. I mean, maybe. I mean, my mother-in-law, who's 89 and blind, she is the queen of Siri. Siri does all kind of things for her. She's on texting all the time. So we don't know, but kind of think about what goes in the database as a permanent record about this person and what's just my notes about how I keep up with her. Jean knows this very well, but we did this report, my firm, Klein and Roth, and Compass Point, when Jean was at Compass Point, called Bright Spots. And we looked at organizations that did very well with individual donor programs. And one was an organization called Jewish Voice for Peace. And they had at that time 57 people on their major gifts team, 57 volunteers. Each of them had a portfolio between 5 and 20 people. And Jean, you'll be amazed to know, when I was just talking to them the other day, they now have 80 people on that team. Of course, they have a full-time staff who works only with the team, but that team brings in about 300,000 or 400,000. So You can have 2 people on your team and you can have 80 people. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Extraordinary.
If we can go to that, so I really recommend that. If we go to the next slide, the touches. Okay, so you're kind of thinking, well, so that's your job as a development person or an executive director, is to tell the team, remind them of certain touches. The touches are pretty obvious. I think you can see here, some are kind of, everybody's getting them, thank you notes and news and stuff like that. And then some are more specific to that person. They do need to be authentic. They're not make work. Don't give people a survey if the reason was just to kind of have a touch. I mean, survey them of their opinion because you want their opinion. Some of them need to be personal, and the goal is 4 to 6 times a year. If we go to the next slide, though, I'm going to tell you what happens in real life. So the donors are extremely varied. You have some people, and I mean, I have a portfolio and a group that I'm a part of, and they have 2 donors that I feel like I don't know what I have to do to get a rise out of them. They don't respond. And so, but they give every year. So I think they are actually reading what I send them, even though they never get in touch with me. That's just how it is. Many don't respond at first because they smell a rat. They think, oh, the only reason you're doing this is to get more money. And that's why everything has to be very authentic. And you have to honestly believe these donors are whole people. They're not just, bank accounts. Most of them, I would say the majority of people in your portfolio notice will respond to some things and not others, or they'll appreciate your effort. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're not. But what's critical is they now feel they have a kind of like a friend at the bank. They can now call you and ask you things if something comes up. So this is a really important thing. And some of you are probably following this very sad story that's happened at this really wonderful organization called L'Arche that was founded by this guy named Gene Veneer, who I would have said prior to 2 or 3 days ago was actually a saint, but he's dead. But it now turns out a huge number of women have come forward and said that he was sexually abusive, sexually assaultive. So those development people are facing a lot of questions about that because they have some of them, not all, each organization is different, each affiliate. But I know one of them, I called her and she said, well, because we have this portfolio program in place, people can call their portfolio manager and ask. And that's going to go a long way to healing this really, this pretty awful thing that's come up and is now in a lot of papers. Any questions about that before I go on?
There are a number of questions, but not specifically about this donor variation. But if we can save about 5 minutes, I've got some general questions.
Okay, let's just finish this up then. Go to the next slide, please. The other thing that's very, very critical to a solid major donor program is focus on prospects. Okay, a prospect is not a suspect. We suspect if we only could get them alone in a room and tell them all about our group that they would become a prospect. No, a prospect is a person you have access to. So it's not Oprah Winfrey, for example, who's everybody's favorite prospect. I'm like, good, if you know her, why are you in this class? But so you know the person, or you know somebody who knows them, you have some door opener. You know for a fact they give away money. This is, of course, you have these extremely wealthy people that don't give. I mean, I won't name any of them. We read about them. Having money is not the same as giving money. Those are different things. And 35% of people in America do not give away money. And the reason they don't give away money, some are possibly too poor, but actually some of them just don't give. And they might be rich enough to buy islands and airplanes and whatever, and they just don't give. So focus on people who give money. And then the thing that I have to perseverate on, do they care about this cause? And there are many people that will care a little. They'll be like, you go, but they don't care enough to actually give money. So really, really focus on prospects. And that comes back to your case because you have to be clear in your exchange. What is it that you are exchanging that's different from the organization next door that might be an equally worthy group? We go to the next slide. In your database then, this is gather information that actually promotes your knowledge of the person. And this is an example from one of my clients. This is what was in the database about someone at first under the less helpful category. The person's a Democrat, low key about giving. And when we went to the more helpful, you'll see what happened. or Democrat, they switched from the Green Party. So what does that tell you about their standing with regard to the Democrats that they're to the left of the Democratic Party? They've lost, they run for city council and lost. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And now they give to organizing, community organizing. So that's an interesting, you can watch the trajectory of their mind in that. Very low key about giving is he actually does not believe donors should get anything for their giving. No refrigerator magnet, no, nothing. So, and turned down being honored at the gala, and actually was pretty offended that the organization had a gala in which they honored people. So this is an interesting character, and you are going to want to know this is a very large donor. It gives between, I think the last gift of this particular person was 25,000. So this is definitely a major donor. Far more useful to know what's in the useful category than this other stuff, which really could have led you all different kind of places. So be specific, be focused on what is your group needs to know. Okay. All right, 2 more slides and then we're done. If we go to the next slide, please. The difference between success and failure, we go to the next slide, is really finding the time. You know, none of us have the time. That's not given to us. We're not just sitting and playing solitaire and hoping that someone will think of something for us to do. We have to push some other things aside. So one of the things is to kind of make your list and work your list. I think people use up a lot of time worrying and fretting and planning. And planning, I'm in favor of planning. I'm not so much in favor of fretting, but you know, you got to work your plan. Who is most likely to say yes? Start with them. That's so anti-Protestant, you know, where we have to eat our broccoli before our cake. No, start with the cake. Who cares? And this means start with the person who's going to give $100. You don't have to go to the $10,000 person first. Start with the person who's going to say yes. Start with the person who might say yes, and then go to the person who you don't know what they're going to say. And you'll be on a roll by then. Set out time in your calendar. These are the times I am going to call people and thank them or ask them or do something with them, and block that time out and do it regularly, like exercise. Okay, whatever you need to do to do well here. All right, and the next slide related to this. This is what's his name? Just went out of my head. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Covey,
Stephen Covey, who's dead now. He said every piece of work that we do, every action we take in life is either important or not important, and either urgent or not urgent. And he said way too many of us live in the urgent quadrant, and we wind up doing a lot of things that are not important, urgent and not important. Live in the important quadrant. Live in the important quadrant. Think, is this important? Maybe it's urgent and important, in which case that clearly do that first. And maybe it's not. Donors are not urgent. Sarah Jones is not sitting at home and thinking, why don't they call me? I can't believe it. Okay, that's she's out living her life, right? But the most important thing for you to do today might be to call her, and that's not going to make it to your urgent list. All right, so final question for all of you. What's next? If we can do the next slide. What's next? What are some changes you could make that would lead to big changes? Let me open up to questions, comments, concerns.
Sure, thank you. One of the things is we've had a number of questions about relationships, because that's how you started. And then when you went so deep into the team and the portfolio management, I think the relationship based came through so well. So people have questions about, once I have those relationships, how do I transfer them? Do we get overly dependent on a single person who's then we can't transfer those relationships? Can you make someone a portfolio manager who doesn't have any relationships yet with your community? Talk a little bit more about that, like chicken or the egg there. And then how do you transfer those relationships?
Okay, well, let's talk about the transfer first, because that's pretty straightforward. And even if you don't have a portfolio program, you are going to have some way to transfer relationships, because you're going to have turnover in your board or in your staff. And this is where I think just really being very deliberate. So maybe let's say I meet with someone who gives, $2,500. I meet with them once or twice, or I talk to them on the phone once or twice. The next time I meet with them, I'm going to bring somebody else with me just to introduce. I thought you'd like to meet someone who's a new board member. Very casual. Next time I might bring them again. Then that person is now in a position to take over that relationship. And there's no kind of, I'm handing you off, it just kind of happens very naturally. Now, some of you that are national organizations or very, very large regions, the personal meeting may not be that realistic, in which case, I would probably say, when you call the person to say, we have some new people on our board, and they want to talk to donors who've been around for a while and find out what you like about the group. It really helps integrate them into the board. And so again, this is using the person in a different arena than just their money, using them for their other knowledge, and asking, do you mind if George calls you? And generally people will say no. In the worst case, in the kind of, I don't say worst case, but in the, sometimes it just happens to say, I'm leaving the board now, and I have really enjoyed our relationship, and I hope we keep in touch. And then this is an important thing for board members when they leave, or portfolio managers, that they do need to keep in touch for a while, like even just a, holiday card or something like that. But so-and-so is now going to be your main point of contact, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of people having a portfolio when they don't know people, yeah, that's fine. They would just get a group of people they don't know. Presumably the reason they don't know them is because nobody knows them. I mean, that, there's always going to be a huge number of donors in your donor base that nobody knows, and they can write and say, we don't know each other, but we have something very important in common. We care a great deal about the future of the snail darter, or whatever. I want to let you know this is happening, and then kind of announce, I'm managing you. I want to just let you know this is happening, and then a couple months later, I want to invite you to this, and it just becomes this very natural, kind of like how you would maybe develop a relationship in a neighborhood or something, where you're not pretending this is my best friend and our families are going to go on vacation together. I mean, no, it's not that. We have this thing in common, and we're just going to move forward with that.
A tactical question, and also part of the psychology, I think, of how do you get a meeting with someone you want to get a meeting with if you're feeling nervous about that? A donor.
Well, if you're feeling,
how do you get a personal meeting?
Okay, so but if you're nervous, then you just have to set that aside. So how do you get a meeting with anyone? Is you probably, in this day and age, you send them an email or a text and you say, I'd like to meet with you. And this is like, email to me was a gift from God. I remember when I first learned it, it was 20 years ago. I was like, oh my God, this is so much easier than getting on a phone cold, trying to figure out what time is it there, what are they doing. Can I meet with you? I'm going to be in your neck of the woods. I think there's a cute little coffee shop that opened near you. Could we just talk for like half an hour? I know you're terribly busy. I'm happy to come to your office. I mean, how do we get a meeting with anyone when we're going to try to get a job, or we're trying to do anything? It's just the same way. And to know that most people will not agree to meet. Most people will be like, no. But there's a lot of evidence that those people are more likely to give and to give again because you offered. Sort of like, this is really, we know this from our families, where Aunt Martha says, oh, you shouldn't have sent that thing, but fully well if you hadn't, you'd be written out of the will. So, she appreciated it. You didn't have to, but she appreciated it. Stop being nervous and start using skills you have. Nervousness isn't a skill. You know how to be nice, you know how to be kind, and you know how to make friends and keep friends, right? Go there, stay in that quadrant, and it will give you all the information you need.
That's great advice. Last question. I think our brief discussion about institutional funding, which maybe is a whole nother webinar of transitioning, but can you talk a little bit more about sort of the government funded organizations that, whether replacement or not, just may want to expand into this donative space, into a major donor program? Have you seen groups have success with that? What are the key barriers or opportunities there?
Well, probably the biggest barrier, besides the group's own kind of lack of experience, the biggest barrier is that the community has gotten used to that. Is like, well, doesn't the government pay for that? So there has to be kind of, the government pays for this, but here's what we need. We need this extra thing. We need this. And actually, sometimes I find, I know this one direct service program, they just said if we had another 5 cents on the dollar, so that seems really cheap, but we had another 5 cents on the dollar, we could work with 50 more young people. Okay, or we could do this, and it was a great little come on. I felt like, I could send in this money, and my 5 cents was augmented by 95 cents from the government. So, kind of understanding that, that's a way to turn that's part of your case. The other thing is that you can honestly say the government, this tax money is very closely monitored. It's the people's money, as it should be. But there are certain things that we want to try. It's not really fair to ask taxpayers to underwrite just experiments, but we think these are important. Would you help us? And this is where major gifts are very, very useful. You can sit down with someone and say, you know, would you put in $10,000? We want to test. We want to see if we have a hunch about how to deal with homelessness among teenagers. And we think it has a lot to do with building a self-esteem and things like that. And we have a program we'd like to try. Would you fund that? If we can show that, if we are right and we can show that, we then know there are other sources of that. So a lot of times the government funded programs, you might need ongoing undesignated funding. That's true. But a lot of times you need something that allows you to do something you're not allowed to do inside your contract, or that, and people like that. And that individual invitation to a person, I think you can understand that.
Yeah.
You know, I think that would be something for you. The major gifts really lends itself to that in a way that, you know, more broad mass mailings and mass online appeals don't.
Right. And again, you're looking for major donors that believe in and care about direct service, you know, and at least in the Bay Area, you know, those are different, there's different communities, right? Where, again, I have a lot of clients who are trying to sell direct service to people who are more, you know, I don't know, entrepreneurial or tech, or, you know, they want to see change. They don't want to see service. And you have to confront that, don't you? I mean, they're not service funders. They're not service donors.
Well, that's it. That's the thing when I said the thing about affinity. What does this person really believe in? Like, you know, I think a lot of people that are all about, you know, change and changing public policy and changing the law, they're in favor of direct service. They wouldn't say, oh no, it shouldn't exist. But it just doesn't rise. It's number 11 on the list of 10 things they give to. Right. And I think all of us are like that. I mean, I hear things in the news or read in the paper every day, and I think, God, I hope somebody helps that group. Not me, exactly. You know.
Well, that's why your 3A slide is so important, right?
Yeah, really come back to that.
Yeah.
AAA. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're out of time, Kim, and I'm so appreciative of this rich discussion. I know our participants were by the volume of questions, and a reminder that you're going to get a recording, the slides, 2 additional articles by Kim will be in your inboxes by Monday. Join the Leading Edge program if you want to just not even think about it and have access to all of these monthly webinars on management and leadership content. And again, Kim, thank you so very much. It was an honor to work with you on this, and coming out of semi-retirement, kind of retirement. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate you, Jean, and Nonprofit Quarterly, really one of the great gifts to the whole nonprofit sector. So thanks very much for having me.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.